Hello, everyone. So today we are going to look at a component of CSEC French paper 2, which is letter writing. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so firstly, key points to note. The instructions should be read carefully and the outline of the letter ought to be followed. All right. Just pay attention to these key points. These things are going to help you through the letter writing, all right? So the instructions, I'm going to read it again. The instructions should be read carefully and the outline of the letter ought to be followed. All right? The outline serves as a guide to highlight the information that needs to be included in your letter. Lastly, the letter overall should utilize a variety of tenses, even though the main details are exciting parts of the story may be focused in one tense, most often the past tense. All right, so those are some key points, right, to know. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So now we are going to look at an example of instructions and a letter outline from CSEC 2016. So we're going to look at a 2016 past paper, and we're going to look at an example of instructions and a letter outline. All right. So this is a letter example. So these are the instructions here. It says, write a letter of approximately 130 to 150 words in French using the outline as a guide. Use the tense or tenses appropriate to the topic. All right. You have just returned from your trip to a French-speaking country. Write a letter to your aunt in Montreal in which you include 1, details of your trip, where, when, and how you traveled, why you went. Number 2, the things that you enjoyed most on your trip. Number 3, your impressions of the country. And number 4, why every student of French should visit a French-speaking country. So these are the instructions here, and this is basically your outline of the things that you need to include in your letter. So this is an example from CSEC 2016. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so here's going to be some tips. All right, some useful tips. Pay close attention to the cues given as they indicate the tenses and moods that you need to use in your letter. Let's use CSEC 2016 letter cues as an example. So basically, now we're going to look at the cues from the 2016 past paper, right? To see how the cues can indicate the tenses and the moods that you need to use. All right. So let's look at cue number 1. It says details of your trip. Where, when, and how you traveled. Why you went. Now, if you look at the verb is usually the indication of what kind of tense you're going to use, right? Because it's like, when did this action happen? So it says how you traveled. So because it is the past tense, you know you're going to need to use the passé composé, right? Where you went, talking about, going somewhere. I went somewhere. We're going to use the passé composé. So basically, right, you can read, when you read this cue, we look at the tense that the verb is used in English, which gives us an indication of the tense that we need to use in French, right? I hope you guys got that. So let's look at the next cue. Cue number 2, the things that you enjoyed most on your trip. If you look at the tense that the verb enjoy is used in, you see that there's the ed at the end, which indicated that this action was in the past. So we're going to use the passé composé, right? Because we're talking about a completed action. Always remember that. Traveled and went were both completed actions. That's why we're going to use the passé composé here. And the same thing for cue number 2, right? All right. Cue number 3, your impressions of the country. Side note, impressions are typically descriptive, and the description of past events requires the use of the imperfect, right? Remember, the imperfect is also a form of the past tense, right? But it's usually to describe repeated actions, and you use it to also describe things, right? All right, so cue number 4, why every student of French should visit a French-speaking country, right? So it says should visit. This word here, should, is an indication of what we need to use here. And in this case, it's going to be the conditional, all right? So why every student of French should visit a French-speaking country, we are going to use the conditional, right? Should. So for description of past events, we're going to use the imperfect, right? For actions that happened in the past that were completed actions, we are going to use the passé composé. And this word should, right, indicated to us that we need to use the conditional. So I hope that is clear for you guys. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so this is the part where now you have to think about what you're going to say that corresponds to each cue. All right, so let's look at cue number 1. From this cue, they want to know where you traveled, when you traveled, and how you traveled. And they also want to know, why did you go? All right. So for each thing, I put it in a different color to help you follow what we put in this sentence here. All right. So everything that is needed or is required from the cue is in this short paragraph. So we have here, en 2012, j'ai fait un voyage en Martinique pour améliorer mon français. J'y suis allé en avion et le voyage n'a duré que 45 minutes. All right. And what this is saying is, in 2012, I traveled to Martinique in order to improve my French. I went there, literally, by plane, and the trip only took 45 minutes. All right. So for the things required by the queue, right? Where did you travel? All right, where you traveled. So in this case here, when you look here, that is Martinique. Where, as you can see, we put the color in blue, and what we wrote in French here is also in blue. So where is Martinique, right? Travel to Martinique. When is here? En 2012, right? In 2012. All right. How you traveled is over here. When we said, I went there by plane. When you put en avion, is an indication of how you got there, right? And the why you went. As you can see, that is highlighted in purple here. Pour améliorer mon français. In order to improve my French, right? So whenever you say in order to do something, that basically states the purpose of or the reason behind why you are doing a particular thing, right? So, en 2012, j'ai fait un voyage en Martinique pour améliorer mon français. Je suis allé en avion et le voyage n'a duré que 45 minutes. All right? So that's it for the first cue. So you understand the when is in 2012, the where is in Martinique, right? Is to Martinique. We travel to Martinique. The why is in order to improve my French, and the how is by plane. All right. I hope that is clear. Let's move on to cue number 2. So cue number 2 is asking us to include information about the things that you enjoyed most on your trip. So what we have here is ce que j'ai apprécié le plus. C'était la cuisine martiniquaise et ma rencontre avec X-Man, un artiste martiniquais qui est très connu, right? And what that says is, what I enjoyed the most was Martinican cuisine and meeting X-Man, right? A Martinican artist who is well known. All right. So as you can see, the things that we enjoyed the most here are highlighted in blue. And that is la cuisine martiniquaise et ma rencontre avec X-Man. All right. And this sentence here is just basically explaining who X-Man is. All right. A well-known Martinican artist. All right, let's look at cue number 3. Okay, so cue number 3 asks for your impressions of the country. And here we have La Martinique était comme un paradis. Il faisait beau, les habitants étaient gentils, le paysage était joli et les plages étaient incroyablement belles. And what that is saying here is Martinique was like heaven. Right? It was like a paradise. It's like heaven. The weather was beautiful. The inhabitants were nice, or the people there were nice. The scenery was lovely. And the beaches were incredibly beautiful, right? And the impressions here are highlighted in blue. Remember, for the impressions, we're describing things about the country. And we describe that Martinique is like heaven, is like a paradise, right? The weather was beautiful. That's a description. The people were nice, right? The scenery was lovely, and the beaches were incredibly beautiful. All of those are giving your impressions because you're describing things. I hope that is clear. I hope you guys understand. Let's move on to cue number 4. Okay, cue number 4 says, why every student of French should visit a French-speaking country. So this is something you need to add as well. Remember, the cues indicate things that you need to include in your story, right, for the letter that you're writing. So what we have here is, je pense que toutes les personnes qui étudient le français devraient visiter un pays francophone parce qu'ils auraient l'opportunité de parler français souvent et se faire des amis francophones. All right, and what that says is, I think that everybody, all right, who studies French, or everybody who's studying French, should visit a French-speaking country because they would have the opportunity to speak French often and make French-speaking friends. All right, so that answers cue number 4. So we have done everything that is required of us so far for each cue. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, here's another useful tip. So add additional information to make your letter flow smoothly. The cues only serve as a guide, therefore using them alone will leave your letter sounding incomplete. You can include elements such as time, weather, and/or location to enhance the quality of the account of events. You can also incorporate your thoughts, feelings, or other matters that may be directly or indirectly related to the story. All right, so for example, we have down here. So what we have here highlighted in red is the part that we added. If you look carefully here of what we have in black, this was something that the cue required of us, which we wrote earlier, right? But as you can see, more information was written to make this make more sense, and you will see that in a bit. So what we have here is, pendant mon séjour, j'ai visité beaucoup d'endroits. J'ai fait du tourisme et j'ai rencontré beaucoup de gens. Mais ce que j'ai apprécié le plus, c'était la cuisine martiniquaise et ma rencontre avec X-Men, un artiste martiniquais qui est très connu. All right. So it says, during my stay, I visited a lot of places. I went sightseeing, I met a lot of people. But what I enjoyed the most was Martinican cuisine and meeting X-Men, right? A Martinican artist who is well known. So you can see now by adding this additional information, this now makes this piece of information that we wrote, right, based on what the cue required of us. You see, by joining this together with what we wrote previously, it makes everything flow and make sense, right? All right, so I hope that is clear. Let's move on to the next slide. So here are some key points to note. All right. Always make sure to include a date in the top right-hand corner, which lists the country or city you are in and the date. Example, Bridgetown, le 18 juillet 2020. Right? Bridgetown, comma, right? The 18th of July, 2020. All right, next key point to note, right, is that your letter should have a structure. Greetings and salutations. Greetings or salutations, sorry. Opening and closing, right? It should have an introduction, a body, as well as a conclusion, all right? And lastly, the person to whom you are writing must always be addressed using familiar language, that being tu, right? Only if you are writing a letter to a group of persons or more than one person would you use something like vous. But generally, you are writing a letter to one person, so you are going to use tu in your letter writing, all right? Let's move on. So we have the format of date and salutation. So when you're writing your letter, make sure the date goes in the right-hand corner of the page. If you look carefully, this is the right-hand corner, and you see Bridgetown le 2 octobre 2020, right? And as you can see on the left, it says salutation goes beneath the date in the left-hand corner. So if you look carefully, you would note that the salutation is not on the same line as the date, right? And instead of the right-hand corner, it's on the left. So the date and the city, along with the city, goes in the right-hand corner, while the salutation goes in the left-hand corner. But it must be the line below the date, right? They cannot be on the same line. All right. I hope everyone gets that. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so here we are going to look at some salutations. All right. So we have cher, right? This is the way we say dear in French, right? And despite whatever form it takes, it's always pronounced cher. However, depending on the person that you are going to address will determine the form of the word. So if you're writing your letter to a boy, you're going to say cher, cher, C-H-E-R. If you are writing to a girl, it's going to be cher, C-H-E, accent grave, R, and there's going to be an E. There's going to be another E at the end, right? Plus the name of the girl. If it's more than one person you're writing to, and it's more than one boy, it's going to be cher, C-H-E-R-S, right? Plus the two names of the boys, right? But please note that this can also apply to a boy and a girl. So if it's Paul and Pauline, you can say Cher Paul et Pauline, right? But you would use the cher here with the S at the end. All right, but if it's two girls, you would use cher, but with the E at the end along with the S, right? The same form we have for a girl when we're referring to a girl, we say Pauline, chère Pauline, C-H-E accent grave R-E, right? We use that same form, but we add S at the end, right? So you would say that plus the name of the two girls. All right. And lastly down here, you can simply use salut, right? Which means hi or hello, and you can put the name of the individual. So let's take a look at some examples. So to say dear Paul, you say cher Paul, right? C-H-E-R, Paul. That means dear Paul. If we are saying Pauline, which is a girl, we said cher, C-H-E accent grave R-E, and then the name Pauline, right? So that would be dear Pauline, right? If we're going to use more than one person, more than one boy, or a boy and a girl, we're going to use cher, C-H-E-R-S, right? Before the names. In this case, in this example, you can see here, it says, cher Paul et Nicolas, right? Dear Paul and Nicholas, right? And for the girls, right, when you're addressing more than one girl, we have chère Pauline et Aude. And that cher is spelled C-H-E accent grave R-E-S. Pauline et Aude. Dear Pauline and Aude. All right. Lastly, we have salut. Salut Andy. Right? Hello or hi Andy. All right. So you can see the examples of how to use this with names. You can see how they are formed, how the word is formed when you're referring to a girl, when you're referring to a boy, when you're referring to more than one boy, when you're referring to more than one girl, or as you can see with salut, you can just simply add the name of the person and it doesn't change, right? Well, even though we don't have the example to show that it doesn't change, just keep in mind that salut doesn't change if it's a boy or a girl, all right? All right, let's move on to the next slide. So we're now going to look at the introduction. All right, good. So for your introduction, all right, important things to note. A general inquiry about the person's well-being followed by a good wish to them and their family is a good way to start off your introduction, right? So example, comment vas-tu? J'espère que tu vas bien. How are you? I hope all is well. Or you can say, ça va? J'espère que tu vas bien pour toi et ta famille. How are you? I hope all is well with you and your family. All right. Note that you can also insert a long time no see message, and this can be placed at the very beginning of your introduction. So, for example, ça fait un bail. Comment vas-tu? J'espère que tu vas bien. Long time no see. How are you? I hope all is well. All right. So for your introduction, these are the things that you can do, and this helps to add more words to your letter, right? Because you need to get between 130 to 150 words. All right. Let's move on to the next slide. Oh, whoops. All right. So for the next part of your introduction, because this is basically still part of your introduction, you need to state the purpose of the letter, right? So you have to state the purpose of the letter that you're writing. So after inquiring about the person's well-being, Be sure to briefly introduce the purpose of your letter. Example, what it will be about. So, for example, you can say, je t'écris pour te raconter mes vacances or mon voyage. I'm writing you to tell you about my vacation or trip. Another thing you can say is, je t'écris pour te dire ce qui m'est arrivé. I'm writing you to tell you what happened to me. Or you can also use je voudrais te parler de. I would like to talk to you about. So these are three ways that can help you to state the purpose of your letter, right? So when you use, for example, je voudrais te parler de, you can say, je voudrais te parler de mes vacances, right? I would like to talk to you about my vacation. Je voudrais te parler de mon voyage. I would like to talk to you about my trip. Je voudrais te parler de mon anniversaire. I would like to talk to you about my birthday, right? So those are ways that you can use to state the purpose of your letter. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, the body and the conclusion. So for the body should contain the information required by the cues. Remember, we went through that earlier, right? Number two, additional details should be included to improve the quality of your letter. So remember, we went through that earlier as well, whereby one of the cues required us to only talk about what we enjoyed the most on the trip. And we also added additional information to make that part make sense, right? So it made the story flow better. All right, and number three, appropriate usage of tenses and moods will be important. Example, passé composé, imperfect, future conditional, and so forth. All right, so let's look at an example of the body of a letter. So this is everything we did so far with the cues and the additional information that we added so far. So I'm going to read it in French first, and then we're going to do the overall translation so you can understand what the body is. So even though we went through this earlier, I'm going to go through it again. But yeah, this time, the entire story. So we have, en 2012, j'ai fait un voyage en Martinique pour améliorer mon français. J'y suis allé en avion et le voyage n'a duré que 45 minutes. Pendant mon séjour, j'ai visité beaucoup d'endroits. J'ai fait du tourisme et j'ai rencontré beaucoup de gens. Mais ce que j'ai apprécié le plus, c'était la cuisine martiniquaise et ma rencontre avec X-Men, un artiste martiniquais qui est très connu. La Martinique était comme un paradis. Il faisait beau, les habitants étaient gentils, le paysage était joli et les plages étaient incroyablement belles. Je pense que toutes les personnes qui étudient le français devraient visiter un pays francophone parce qu'ils auraient l'opportunité de parler français souvent et se faire des amis francophones. All right, so this is what the entire body of the letter says. In 2012, I traveled to Martinique in order to improve my French. I went there by plane and the trip only took 45 minutes. During my stay, I visited a lot of places. I went sightseeing and I met a lot of people. But what I enjoyed the most was the Martinican cuisine and meeting X-Man, a Martinican artist who is well known. Martinique was paradise. It was basically heaven. We can say, you can say either or, right? The weather was nice. The people were nice. The scenery was lovely, and the beaches were incredibly beautiful. I think that everyone who is studying French should visit a French-speaking country because they would have the opportunity to speak French often and make some French-speaking friends. All right, so that's the example of the body of a letter. Now for our conclusion. An informal letter should end with an expressed desire to hear from the person to whom you are writing. So some examples of this in French are écris-moi vite, right? Write me soon. Or you can say j'attends de tes nouvelles. Looking forward to hearing from you. Or another option you can use is maintenant, je te laisse. J'espère te lire bientôt. I'll be taking my leave now. I hope to hear from you soon. So those three you can use, right? Those are three options that you can use, right? There must be a closing greeting just as there is an opening greeting, right? So remember we looked at the opening greeting, which was like cher, the ones that we looked at, cher, right? There are salut. Now we're looking at the closing greeting. So here we have bisous, which means kisses. And you can see directly under the closing greeting, there is the name of the person who is writing the letter, right? So in this case, that is me. So right under that, you can see my name, Daniel. All right. Now let's look at some other closing greetings that you can use, not just bisous, right? So you have je t'embrasse, which means with love, je t'embrasse. Or you can use bisous, which is the one that we looked at earlier. You also have chaleureusement, with warm regards. Or there is amicalement, which is something I think is a bit easy to remember, which means best wishes. We also have amitié, which also means best wishes. Another thing you can say is à bientôt, see you soon. Or something nice here that you can also use is bien cordialement, right? Kind regards. All right, so these are some examples of some other closing greetings that you can use to end your letter. All right, so we're going to look at an example of a completed letter, right? So good. Now we have our entire letter. So you can see this is everything we did so far here in the body, right? So you would notice that I have highlighted the date, and notice that the greeting, the opening greeting, is not on the same line as the date and the city. And note at the end here for our closing greeting is here at the bottom. And at the bottom here, you can see my name directly below the closing greeting, right? So this is what a completed letter ought to look like. So now we're putting together everything, and I'm going to go through everything right now. So we have the Bridgetown le 2 octobre 2020. Chère Cécile, ça fait un bail. Comment vas-tu? J'espère que tu vas bien. Je t'écris pour te raconter mon voyage en Martinique. En 2012, j'ai fait un voyage en Martinique pour améliorer mon français. J'y suis allé en avion et le voyage n'a duré que 45 minutes. Pendant mon séjour, j'ai visité beaucoup d'endroits, j'ai fait du tourisme et j'ai rencontré beaucoup de gens. Mais ce que j'ai apprécié le plus, c'était la cuisine martiniquaise et ma rencontre avec X-Man, un artiste martiniquais qui est très connu. La Martinique était comme un paradis. Il faisait beau, les habitants étaient gentils, le paysage était joli et les plages étaient incroyablement belles. Je pense que toutes les personnes qui étudient le français devraient visiter un pays francophone parce qu'ils auraient l'opportunité de parler français souvent et se faire des amis francophones. Maintenant, je te laisse. J'espère te lire bientôt. Bisous, Daniel. So you have no, this is what your completed letter looks like. All right, so you have the date here, Bridgetown, 2nd October 2020. Dear Cecile, long time no see. How are you? I hope all is well. I'm writing you to tell you about my trip to Martinique. All right, so you see how the opening works. I hope you're seeing how this is all coming together. So in 2012, I traveled to Martinique in order to improve my French. I went there by plane, and the trip only took 45 minutes. During my stay, I visited a lot of places. I went sightseeing, and I met a lot of people. But what I enjoyed the most was Martinican cuisine and meeting X-Man, a Martinican artist who is well known. Martinique was like a paradise. The weather was beautiful. The inhabitants were nice. The scenery was lovely. And the beaches were incredibly beautiful. I think that every person who is studying French should visit a French-speaking country because they would have the opportunity to speak French often and make French-speaking friends. Now I'll take my leave. I hope to hear from you soon. Kisses, Daniel. All right. So that was our letter. You can see how we put together the letter step by step. All right. So, okay, guys, that was it for today. Merci pour votre attention et à plus.
No way.